Hello again everyone, and welcome back. The Delirium League has finally arrived, and it has proven itself to be particularly brutal. Within the swirling fog, both countless threats and bountiful loot await the daring player. The more content you can take down before the fog dissipates, the greater your prize will be. Delirium demands serious clear speed, and the Frostblade's Berserker delivers that in spades. Fueled by our powerful Ascendancy, we can reach up to 11 attacks per second, with each of those attacks targeting multiple nearby enemies, shredding entire packs with a flurry of Frostblade projectiles and resounding Herald of Ice explosions. Combine that with frantic leap slams, and you'll be flying from pack to pack, outpacing the Delirium fog with ease. Against bosses, the build manages some surprising single-target capability, able to put down high-tier Metamorphs, Conquerors, and Guardians quite quickly. We'll be scaling Frostblade's inherent power with 2 of its corresponding jewels, a variety of reliable support skills, and of course our potent offensive Ascendancy. With our heavy hits and rapid attack speed, you'll often find yourself chain-freezing bosses permanently, completely nullifying them the instant the fight begins. Offensively, the build is quite the powerhouse, but if there's one thing the Berserker Ascendancy doesn't do so well, it's going to be defense. The build does fine with a reasonable life pool, powerful recovery through our life leech and flasks, stun, chill, and freeze immunity, consistent fortify, some block chance, cast when damage taken a mortal call, and a ton of physical damage reduction. But one of our best defensive layers is undoubtedly our clear speed and raw damage output. The ability to crush threats and chain freeze bosses before they have a chance to do much of anything is invaluable and allows the build to fly through high-tier content with relative ease. Such an offensively focused build can face an occasional death and is not recommended for those playing hardcore. Gearing up this build is exceptionally cheap and relies mostly upon rare items and affordable uniques. Just about every unique used can be easily replaced with a rare alternative, making this a very viable option for those playing solo self-found. Due to the sheer power of our Ascendancy, the build functions incredibly well with just basic gear, and can use a variety of cheap unique swords to push comfortably into mid-tier mapping, where it can quickly and efficiently farm currency and scale into the deep endgame. Frostblade's Berserker is destructively powerful and blurs the line between melee and range. Its clear speed and shattering explosions make it a blast to play, and it feels tailor-made for farming maps and getting the most out of each and every Delirium. From me, this build comes heavily recommended. Experience true attack speed today. For easy navigation, timestamps to every section of the guide are available in the description and pinned comment below. If you're enjoying the guide so far, consider subbing to the channel for more upcoming build guides just like this. This guide utilizes the free program Path of Building to summarize and display its information at a glance. If you're watching this in a league following 3.10, the Path of Building will have been updated with any necessary changes. You can find a full list of these changes in the notes section of the Path of Building and a video description as well. Now let's get started by taking an overview look at our endgame skill tree and discussing the primary goals of the build. We'll be taking the life-based route out of the Marauder starting area and expanding outward along the bottom of the skill tree. Offensively, this build dual-wields swords, is critical strike based, and deals completely cold damage that will be converting from physical damage. As a result, we benefit from all attack nodes that increase physical, cold, or general elemental damage. We'll be prioritizing picking up a heap of attack speed, critical strike chance and critical strike multiplier, some accuracy, and a variety of different percentage-based increases to our damage. Defensively, we'll be focused on scaling a ton of life regeneration, armor, and physical damage reduction in just a single node of life leech. We'll also be allocating a bit of utility through some jewel sockets and a single node of mana leech to keep our rapid use of Frostblade sustained. With the basics of the skill tree covered, let's dive into its counterpart and discuss what the Marauder Ascendancy of Berserker brings to the table. We'll be utilizing the following 4 Ascendancy nodes, the first of which is Aspect of Carnage. This brutally powerful node causes us to deal 40% more damage, but in return increases the amount of damage that we take by 10%. A simple but brutally powerful node that essentially provides us with a 7th link. Next up, we have Flawless Savagery. This node brings a little bit of everything that we're looking for and comes with no downside, granting us a healthy amount of physical damage to attacks, critical strike chance, and critical strike multiplier as well. Our final 2 Ascendancies, Crave the Slaughter and Rite of Ruin, work in tandem. Crave the Slaughter grants us access to the buff Rage. We gain 1 rage on hit with attacks at most every 0.3 seconds, stacking up to a maximum of 50 rage, increasing our damage, attack speed, and movement speed at different rates. Our rage will start to atrophy if we haven't gained any or been hit in the last 4 seconds. We'll be amplifying Rage's effect with Rite of Ruin, which triples all of the benefits we gain from having rage. With our maximum of 50 rage, we'll be gaining a ridiculous 150% increased attack damage, 75% increased attack speed, and 30% increased movement movement speed. Stacking up to maximum rage is not difficult to do and is easily achieved when mapping or engaging with most league mechanics. When we aren't losing rage, we'll be losing 0.1% of our life each second for every rage we have. Fortunately, we have plenty of life regeneration that helps to offset this negative effect. All of these nodes do serious work offensively and are the main reason the build can muster this much power. The order in which you choose to pick up these Ascendancies is completely flexible. My recommendation is grabbing Crave the Slaughter and Rite of Ruin first. Having early access to Rage speeds you up heavily and makes the leveling experience a lot smoother. From there, I would pick up Aspect of Carnage before wrapping up with Flawless Savagery when you complete your final Labyrinth. Now that we've discussed the build's fundamentals, let's move into the Bandit and Pantheon selections. This time around, I heavily recommend siding with Alira. The critical strike multiplier and free resistances are just too good to pass up. We have enough skill points already to pick up everything we really want from the skill tree, making those extra points from Aramir much less tempting. Our Pantheon selection is very flexible. Regardless of what you choose, be sure to capture all of the additional souls. Of the major gods, both Lunaris and Solaris present the best value to the build. They both grant additional physical damage reduction and a variety of mostly conditional buffs. I went with Lunaris during my time playing the build, but you can't go wrong either way. The minor gods present us with a couple of solid choices. Shikari reduces the amount of chaos damage that we take and gives us a very nice immunity to poison. Alternatively, Rizlatha gives our life flasks some free charges if they haven't been used recently, and heavily speeds up our life recovery when we find ourselves on low life. Both of these are fantastic options and provide meaningful benefits to the build in very different ways. And with that, let's move into the skills and links, beginning first with our main Frostblade setup. This will be a 6-link composed of the following gems. Frostblades itself is a melee strike skill that has 2 individual components, a powerful mid-range melee hit and a fan of projectiles that arc out from the struck enemy. Because of this double nature, some support gems will only scale the damage of the melee hit, while other gems will scale both the damage of the melee hit and the projectiles. Multi-strike is our first crucial link. It causes Frostblades to attack drastically faster and repeat an additional 2 times. The initial melee hit does slightly less damage, but each resounding repeat in turn does significantly more. The next 2 links, Elemental Damage with Attacks and Hypothermia, will both be improving the damage of our melee hit and projectiles. Elemental Damage with Attack skills provides the biggest flat damage bonus of all of our support gems, and Hypothermia provides a very respectable DPS boost of its own, specifically against chilled enemies, while also improving our chill effect and chance to freeze. Our next link, Ruthless, provides a significant but conditional DPS boost to just the melee hit of Frostblades. Every 3rd hit will do a disgusting amount of increased damage, and that brings us to our final link. During the leveling process and early mapping, this is going to be Ancestral Call. Using this gem early on is heavily recommended and causes Frostblades to target 2 additional nearby enemies when you attack. This greatly improves overall clear speed, but can eventually be dropped for more damage once you picked up the Anointment Tribal Fury or some rare gloves with the Hunter modifier. Strike skills target 1 additional nearby enemy. At that point, you can replace Ancestral Call with one of the following 3 gems. Inspiration increases the DPS of both our melee hit and projectiles and lowers the mana cost of Frostblades. Melee physical damage grants a substantial DPS boost to just our melee hit. And finally, Fortify brings to the table a competitive but smaller DPS increase to just our melee hit. However, it also ensures that the Fortify buff is up virtually non-stop. My top recommendation is to go with Fortify, but you can find success with any of these 3. When optimizing your gems, prioritize getting quality on Frostblades first, as it grants a worthy amount of both increased damage and projectile speed. Marching onward, let's discuss the auras that we'll be utilizing. These won't need to be directly linked together. Hatred is staggeringly good in this build, giving us around 25% of our physical damage as extra cold and causing us to deal significantly more cold damage. It comes at a heavy cost of 50% of our available mana, but is more than worth it. Herald of Ice adds a bit of cold damage to our attacks and causes frozen enemies that we kill to explode, dealing huge area of effect based damage to everything around them. This not only makes clearing maps a lot easier, but also much more satisfying. Finally, Precision offers us a bit of helpful critical strike chance and accuracy. We'll be using this purposely at a low level to ensure that it doesn't reserve too much mana. If you find yourself with plenty of mana to go around, you can consider leveling this up a little bit more. Alternatively, for those who can afford an expensive Enlightened level 4, I would recommend dropping Precision, or moving it to a different socket. In its place, we'll be running a 4-link composed of Hatred, Herald of Ice, Herald of Purity, and Enlighten at level 4. Herald of Purity is a great addition to the build, but not necessary and can be put off comfortably for as long as needed. Leaping onward now to our movement skill. This will be a 3-link composed of these gems. Leap Slam is a powerful movement skill that stuns enemies, has no cooldown, and can both cross gaps and phase through barriers. Faster attacks simply speeds up our Leap Slam. An Endurance Charge on melee stun grants us occasional endurance charges when our Leap Slam hits and stuns an enemy, increasing our physical damage reduction. In the remaining 4th socket, you can place any one of our 5 utility skills. I chose to put Blood Rage here, but you can socket whatever you'd like. Blood Rage is a buff that grants us a bit of attack speed and occasional frenzy charges when we kill an enemy. The Blood Rage buff has an inherent duration, but refreshes every time we kill an enemy, and often only needs to be activated once at the beginning of a map. When Blood Rage is active, we take 4% of our maximum life as physical damage each second, but the attack speed and frenzy charges are worth the pain. Our next setup will feature our remaining 4 utility skills. Each of these perform different unrelated functions, and as a result, don't need to be linked together. Vol Ancestral Warchief is a totem skill that grants us a large buff to our melee damage when the totem is active, giving us a very helpful boost during boss fights. Frostbomb further debuffs enemies by slowing down their life and energy shield regeneration and applying -25% to their cold resistance. Once again, this is best used against bosses, and meaningfully increases our DPS when the debuff is active. Vol Molten Shell is another activatable skill. It provides a huge defensive buff equivalent to 60% of our armor that for a long duration will absorb 80% of the damage that we would have taken. This is once again best used during boss fights and other dangerous mapping situations. Our final and most powerful utility skill is Berserk. It rapidly consumes our accumulated rage, but while active, grants us 20% more damage and attack speed, 30% more movement speed, and 20% less damage taken. This is a truly massive DPS boost that can be used very effectively to end fights quickly or wrap them up just as fast. And that brings us to our very last setup, a 3-link composed of these gems at these specific levels. Cast when damage taken at level 1, Immortal Call at level 3, and Summon Ice Golem at level 3. Any spells linked to cast when damage taken that have a level requirement equivalent to or less than that of cast when damage taken itself will be automatically cast when its damage threshold is reached. We're running this setup at such a low level to ensure that Immortal Call is active as much as possible. It causes us to take significantly less elemental and physical damage for a short time, with its overall duration and buff strength being increased for every endurance charge that it removes from our player. Ice Golem provides a small buff to both critical strike chance and accuracy, and having it linked to cast when damage taken support ensures that it will be recast automatically if it dies. With all that covered, the skills and links are completely wrapped up, and it's time for a short discussion of this build's basic mapping and bossing strategies. Mapping with this build is pretty straightforward as you might expect. It's about as simple as activating Blood Rage at the start of the map and just going crazy. Keep your flasks up consistently, use the build's attack speed to your advantage, engaging with packs quickly and moving on just as fast. This is especially crucial in Deliriums. Just keep moving, build up your rage, and before you know it, the entire map will have been shattered to pieces. Bossing is not complex, but has a little bit more to it. Ideally, you'll want to have built up a solid amount of rage in the map and gotten enough souls for your Vol Molten Shell and Vol Ancestral Warchief to be completely ready to go. If you have some time before the boss spawns in or becomes active, you can trigger both Frostbomb and Vol Ancestral Warchief about a second before they become susceptible to damage. The moment before they become fully active, hit your Flasks and trigger Berserk. Most bosses will not be able to withstand your incoming barrage, getting chain frozen and put down fast. If you are facing a particularly deadly boss, you can optionally trigger Vol Molten Shell at this time as well. Be sure to use it when your Granite Flask is active to maximize the defensive buff that it grants. This formula will be very effective for most boss fights, but if the boss fight is particularly long, dodging and understanding attack patterns can be key to survival. Deal damage quickly in open moments and build up rage. You can then re-trigger Berserk towards the middle or end of the fight to wrap things up. Forging onward, it's time that we discuss how to best level the build, and take a look at the early skill trees, useful gems, and helpful leveling gear. In the path of building, you will find additional gear sets and skill trees for the different stages of the leveling process, which you can change just like this. We'll be leveling this build as Frostblades from start to finish. Unfortunately, as a Marauder, you won't gain access to Frostblades immediately. If you want to get it early, you can just buy it from another player, or even easier, just spend 2 minutes getting a Ranger to the first town, at which point they'll receive Frostblades as a quest reward. From there, you'll be spending your early skill points prioritizing life, a bit of attack speed, and some crucial life and mana leech. Getting both types of leech early on will help keep you alive and your mana sustained. We'll also be picking up this early jewel socket for our first fight for survival. You'll receive this gem as a quest reward in Act 5, or you can buy them from other players for very cheap. In the mid game, we'll be picking up more life, DPS nodes, and converting the remainder of our physical damage into cold with Winter's Spirit, as well as another jewel socket right here for our final fight for survival. survival, before moving into the endgame tree, where we'll mostly be fleshing out a lot more life and some of the less crucial DPS nodes. With that covered, let's take a look at what skill and support gems to use during the leveling process. You'll want to be supporting Frostblades with the following gems. Most crucial will be Ancestral Call, Multi-Strike, and Elemental Damage with attack skills. Hypothermia, Inspiration, Ruthless, and melee physical damage will also be great early on. If you want to maximize boss damage, swap out Ancestral Call before fights for something like Ruthless or melee physical damage. Be sure to utilize both Hatred and Herald Device as soon as they become available. Using Leap Slam combined with faster attacks will make your leveling a lot smoother and is heavily recommended. Against bosses, using Frost Bomb and Ancestral Protector or War Chief will make a big difference. Be sure to also add Berserk into the mix once you have access to Rage through your Ascendancies. And finally, as the gems become available to you in the mid-game, you may want to put together the low-level Immortal Call cast when damage taken setup. And with that covered, we've arrived at the leveling gear. You can easily get away with just running decent rares that you pick up through the leveling process. If you're going to spend money on anything early on, get some cheap unique swords with high physical damage. All of the gear I'm going to be recommending here is completely optional and only serves to make the leveling experience smoother. Here you'll find most of the usual cheap suspects. For weapons early on, I highly recommend using 2 princesses. In the mid-game, you can transition into any swords with decent physical damage. As you're approaching the end of the axe and into early mapping, you can transition to any of these options. All of these are strong enough to carry you through early and even mid-tier mapping. Be sure to also utilize helpful flasks like Quicksilver, Diamond, Sulfur, Life, and Mana, as well as solid defensive options like Granite and Basalt. And with all of that covered, it's finally time that we move on to the endgame gear that defines the build. Path of Exile's economy and subsequent item prices are completely player-driven, meaning that the cost of an individual item is at the mercy of supply and demand and may shift over time. As a result, I'll be using broad tiers of price to better estimate the future cost of an item. Those tiers being cheap, 0 to 20 chaos, moderate, 21 to 100 chaos, and expensive, anything over 100 chaos in price. Let's begin first with our endgame weapon selection. As previously covered, dual-wielding any of these flexibly priced uniques will easily get you mapping and can even push into reasonably high tiers. But once you've managed to accumulate some currency, you're going to want to invest in 2 expensive, rare, one-handed swords, with your top priorities being very high physical DPS, attacks per second, and base critical strike chance, with some of your best bases being Corsair, Eternal, and of course, foils. Somewhat less important but still very helpful are high-tier cold damage rolls, extra quality, and extra critical strike multiplier. While swords like these are the true endgame for this build, don't pick anything up until you have the currency to make it a worthwhile upgrade. As far as helmets go, the cheap Abyssus stands far above the rest. Just absurdly powerful with a metric ton of added physical damage and melee critical strike multiplier. It does increase the physical damage that we take by a fair amount, but the DPS boost it offers is far too good to pass up. Alternatively, you can choose to run a flexibly priced rare helmet with an armor base, something that looks like this and has the following priorities. There aren't many helmet enchants that really benefit this build. I have some of the best options listed here, but this should be considered a very low priority and should only be upgraded if you have almost everything else in the build optimized. Our body armor is very flexible and can use a variety of flexibly priced uniques. Here are some of the best available options. While these are quite good, I do recommend going with a rare body armor. You'll be looking, of course, for an armor base that looks something like this and has the following priorities. For those who are on a budget, you can combine all of these body armors, except for the lore weave, with the Jeweler's Touch Prophecy for a cheap 5-link. Alternatively, you can of course use a cheap Tabula Rasa for the early mapping, or you can use these search parameters to pull up a variety of affordable 6-linked body armors with the proper socket colors. For those on the other side of the fence with a very high budget, you can use Feral's Fur, or look for an armor-based rare, with most of the same priorities we discussed previously, but also includes one or several of the following expensive modifiers. Our gloves will again be a flexibly priced rare with an armor base. It should look something like this and have the following priorities. For those on a very high budget, you can look for the modifier Strike Skills Target one additional nearby enemy. Hopping next into the boots, we've got my top recommendation of the cheap Combs Roots. They offer a mountain of life, an immunity to knockback, stun, chill, and freeze, mostly due to unwavering stance. In return, our evade chance is set to 0, but we didn't have much to begin with. More notably, the boots offer no movement speed. However, this is not a big deal, as most of our map traversal is done through our frantically quick leap slams, and we gain a fair amount of movement speed from our onslaught and rage. Alternatively, you can look for a flexibly priced pair of rare armor-based boots with the following priorities. For those with a very high budget, you can also look for the Hunter modifier. You have Tailwind if you have dealt a critical strike recently. This is not a required upgrade and is really only suitable for those who want to push the build as far as possible offensively, even at the cost of defensive layers. Regardless of which you choose, you'll want to enchant these boots with one of the following. My top recommendation is the added cold damage if you've been hit recently. Our amulet is going to be very flexible and is a rare that can have a large variety of different bases. You'll be looking for something like this that has the following priorities. Alternatively, you can choose to run the cheap Yoke of Suffering if you'd like to inflict consistent shocks with your cold damage. When you have an amulet you feel comfortable pushing endgame with, you'll want to be anointing it. My top recommendation is going to be the expensive Tribal Fury. I don't recommend getting both Tribal Fury and the Strike Gloves. While this effect is very helpful for clear speed, I found that having just one is more than good enough. If you end up getting the effect on your gloves, or want to just go in a different direction, here are some of the best offensive and defensive alternatives. Next, we'll be talking about the rings. On the cheaper side, you can easily run 2 flexibly priced rares with the following priorities. These can utilize a huge variety of different bases. Alternatively, you can run the more expensive Mark of the Elder and Shaper ring combo. Mark of the Elder is a moderately priced unique ring that offers a ton of offensive potency, but much of it hinges on having a Shaper influenced rare ring in our second ring slot. It will ideally have the modifier Curse enemies with Assassin's Mark on hit. This curse offers the build a significant DPS boost and consistent access to power charges. This overall combo is very strong and should be one of your top priorities when improving your build. For belts this time around, my top recommendation is going to be a rare belt with either a leather or Stygian base. You'll be looking for something like this with the following priorities. And with all of that discussed, we've arrived at our flasks. Up first is our cheap diamond flask, which makes us significantly more likely to hit critical strikes and is our biggest DPS upgrade from any flask. While the prefix is very flexible, be sure to get immunity to bleeding as the suffix. Next is the more expensive Cinder Swallow, which grants us onslaught and causes us to recover up to 3% of our life and mana for each enemy we kill during the flask effect. This recovery allows us to bounce back from significant damage much more quickly and makes the overall mapping experience a lot smoother. When picking one of these up, you'll be looking specifically for the crafted modifier of percentage increased critical strike chance. Our third flask is going to be the cheap Itziri's Promise. This flask increases our chaos resistance and adds a heap of extra chaos damage to our attacks. Up fourth is the powerful and cheap Lion's Roar, which heavily increases both our melee physical damage and our armor. And that brings us to our final flask, the cheap Blood of the Karui. This life flask offers unparalleled levels of life recovery per second, and should the inherent recovery not be enough, it also brings us to completely full life at the end of the flask effect. Here's some alternatives you can choose to mix in if you'd like. Both the cheap Taste of Hate and cheap Wise Oak offer great offensive and defensive benefits. If you want to add in some curse immunity, you can swap out any of our DPS focused flasks for a Sulfur or Basalt flask with curse immunity. And for those of you who have more money than God, the obnoxiously expensive Bottled Faith offers ridiculous power and utility. And with that, only the jewels remain. Of course, we'll be rocking 2 cheap Fight for Survivals in these 2 specific jewel sockets. If you're running a Stygian Vise, you'll want to pick up an Abyssal Jewel that looks something like this and has the following priorities. In the remaining jewel sockets on the tree, we'll mostly be placing Crimson Jewels. Here are some good examples and some of the top priorities to look for. As far as cluster jewels go, for this build there are not that many notables that really outshine what we already have on the skill tree. We have access to more than enough life and plenty of damage nodes. Spending 3 skill points to essentially pick up nothing lowers the average value of any notables we can actually pick up with the cluster jewels, making most of the cluster jewels we could utilize kind of a side grade at best. However, if you'd like to incorporate one of these into the build, here's some of the best available notables. And here are some of the most inefficient or least essential nodes that you can remove to free up some points. And at the absolute bottom of the list, if you've got a high budget, pick up a solid Watcher's Eye. Here are some of the best modifiers to look for. For those interested, here are the MTXs that were used in the video. Frostblade's Berserker is absurdly powerful, fast, and just satisfying as all hell to play. It's quite easy and flexible to gear, can take down all content, and with investment over time can scale far beyond what you saw in the footage of this video. I had a great time running this build, and I hope that you give it a try. A huge thank you goes to all of my patrons for their continued support of the channel. It's truly appreciated and helps make this content possible. Special recognition goes to the following for their dedicated support: Elixium, Andrew Miller, Bloody, Brandon Kendrick, Christopher Cravey, Christopher Murdoch, Daniel Wig, Darren Clark, Gareth Thomas, Greg Wells, Hunter Wild, Jacob Davey, Jaewon Yu, John Snyder, Ken Butler, Kurt Wood, Michael Johnson, Mick Woodney, Modimus Prime, Pierre-Etienne Suri, Rasmus Blackpelsko, Ray Hill, Renegade, Richard Bollinger, Sabaton Babylon, Sinister Data, Xi, and Zolaris. If you'd like to be credited at the end of each of my videos or join our Discord for Path of Exile and channel discussion, consider checking out the Patreon link in the description below. Finally, if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I hope the video proved to be both helpful and entertaining. If you have any questions for me or about the video, leave them down below and I'll do my best to answer. Consider subbing to the channel for more upcoming build guides just like this. And as always, I've been SRO, and I will see you guys in the next video.